Mohammed Omer spoke at the University of New Mexico November 17th, 2016 about Gaza and the blockade to a group of recently disappointed Democrats who won the popular vote in this country for our new president but lost to the Electoral College. Something that a lot of them were still very vehement about, but as Americans we will accept this new president and hopefully we will wish him the best. I bring that up because there are a lot of correlations between what's going on in Gaza right now and what is going on in the United States. So, Mr. Omar brought up that we should go on social media. It's the only way to bring focus to this, to Gaza Unlocked, and try to bring attention to this issue. And also he wished for us to write on this piece of paper and pose for a photo what I just learned about Gaza. Well, I decided to wait a little while and do a little research before I posed for a photo with some views that would obviously be from a one-sided person, as he was from Gaza himself. Like if I were from Texas and I spoke about anything, it would be a definitely Texas-centric view, and if I was from the United States, it would be a U.S.-centric view, no matter how hard I tried to make it be a globalistic view. So the things that Mr. Omer talked about were wanting to bring attention to the suffering of the people of Gaza. Again, there's 2 million people living in 150 square miles, and they're not allowed to leave this 150 square miles. They're bordered by Egypt and Israel and the Mediterranean Sea. If the people attempt to leave or come in or export or import anything by Israel or Egypt, there is a wall that has been built around their border, and there are motion sensor tracking guns, so that if you go outside of the borders you will be shot. If you go more than 3 miles off the coast of Gaza, which they have an open coast to the Mediterranean, so according to the laws of the sea, they should in all rights be able to leave and go and trade as they please through their open oceans, you'll be shot by one of the navies 3 miles off the coast. These are the points that he brought up. He said that this was illegal and that the people inside of Gaza have been suffering this way for a decade, ever since 2006. So, first of all, why has this happened? Well, this happened originally because Hamas was elected to government over the Fatah government in Gaza. And the Fatah government didn't like this, so around a year later, they basically started a civil war, which they lost. The rest of the international community, the United States, the UN, Egypt, and Israel didn't want to recognize Hamas as the legitimate leader of that country, so they decided to not open their borders to Gaza because of this, to show that this shouldn't have been legitimate. This isn't a legitimate government. Just to bring that back to the interpersonal level here in the United States, if Canada and Mexico decided to block, this would be the same if Canada and Mexico decided to block their borders with the U.S. based off of our election of Donald Trump, because they didn't feel that our election was legitimate because Hilary Clinton won the popular vote but wasn't elected anyway. The difference is that in Gaza, they're also not allowed to leave by sea. So this would mean that if Donald Trump was elected president and Canada and Mexico said you can't have people come in by land for trade, or leave for trade, or just for personal reasons through our borders, but also you can't leave through your western or eastern coast, New York or California, for trade with anyone else in the world, because we don't accept the legitimacy of your pick for U.S. president. Well, because Israel and Egypt didn't accept Hamas as the legitimate pick for their government, they have closed their borders and also closed their Gaza's access to the open ocean. Alright, is this legal? Well, the UN Palmer report in 2011 says that it is legal because, I quote, Gaza is in a period of war. And so this kind of thing is allowed in a period of war. But Mr. Omer is correct. They are not in a period of war because no declaration of war has actually been declared. Therefore, through the law of the sea, which has been around since Hugo Grotius hundreds of years ago and still in effect today, a country has the right to monitor within 3 miles off their coastline, but after that it's got to become international waters because of international trade. Most international trade is done in open oceans, and if you restrict access to these open oceans, international trade would basically grind to a halt. So yes, Mr. Omer is correct. It is absolutely illegal to restrict these people's movement off their own coast. So why is this happening? They didn't touch on it directly, but it was somewhat mentioned. The U.S. needs allies in this area, and Egypt and Israel are basically our best allies in this region. And Gaza is only 150 square miles if you include the 3 miles of ocean off their coast that they're allowed by the Egyptians and the Israelis. So geopolitically, it's a lot easier to turn a blind eye to it and say, sure, they're at a period of war and you can do this. But it's been a decade that they've been in a period of war, that they haven't wanted to accept this Hamas-elected government. And the 2 million people living within this 150 square miles are rotting on top of each other because that small portion of land and sea is not able to support that many people without imports and exports. Education is being hampered because even though these kids might get scholarships to other places in the world, they're not allowed to leave and go take them. And thusly, people aren't allowed to come in their country and learn in their universities. So, I do support Mr. Omer and his speaking tour to bring more emphasis onto the situation in Gaza. I mean, just look. If America wasn't as strong as it was, and you were part of the U.S., and we elected Donald Trump, which we did, but the rest of the world saw it as illegitimate, which they largely do. But let's just say we were a lot smaller and a lot less strong, which we aren't. And Canada and Mexico said, you can't move any of your goods by land or sea, you can't move any of your people in or out by land or sea until you get rid of Donald Trump. Well, it's not any of their business who we elect and how we elect them. And to say that our elections were illegitimate and that we no longer can interact with the rest of the world and we are effectively a forced xenophobia, a xenophobic attitude would be impressed on us, where we couldn't trade with anyone else in the world until we got rid of our current president. That's basically what's going on there. Because Hamas was elected, they can't trade with the rest of the world. They can't leave or come in to their country. And more importantly, and I think most importantly, they're not allowed to use their own ocean and to access the rest of the world, because the Palmer Report and the United Nations say that they're in a period of war, and no declaration of war has ever been declared between Israel and Gaza or Egypt and Gaza. And that's very important that their right to the international waters be supported, if nothing else, so that these people, these 2 million people within this 150 square miles, are allowed once again to interact with the rest of the world. Because let's face it, Hamas was elected. Whether you like it or not, that is the leader of their country. And putting these people in an open-air prison for a decade because you didn't like the leader they chose is just wrong. Thank you again for Mr. Omer coming to speak to all these wonderful Lobos here in the University of New Mexico, and I hope your speaking tour goes good to the rest of the United States, and I desperately hope that more attention is brought to the desperate plight of the Gazan people.